The bell above Rosie's diner chimed for what felt like the 100th time that evening, and Maria Castellano didn't even look up from the order pad, clutched in her flour-dusted hands. Saturday nights were always chaos, but tonight felt different. The air was thick with the smell of grilled onions and fresh coffee, and every booth was packed with families celebrating the end of another week. Maria moved through the narrow aisles between tables with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing this dance for 3 years, balancing plates on her forearms and remembering orders without writing half of them down. Her feet ached in the cheap sneakers she'd bought from the discount store 2 months ago, the soles already wearing thin against the checkered linoleum floor. She was 26 years old, and some days she felt twice that age. The diner was her second home, the only place she could afford to call home since her mother got sick and the medical bills started piling up like autumn leaves. Mr. Patterson, the owner, was a decent man who paid just above minimum wage and let her take home the day-old bread, but he ran a tight ship with rules posted in the back room that everyone was expected to follow without question. Rule number 7 was printed in bold red letters and underlined twice: no free meals under any circumstances, no exceptions. Maria had seen 2 waitresses get fired for breaking that rule, and she couldn't afford to join them. Her mother's medication cost $800 a month, and the rent on their studio apartment was due in 5 days. She pushed through the swinging kitchen door with her hip, calling out orders to Danny, the line cook who'd worked here since before Maria was born. He grunted acknowledgement without looking up from the griddle, his spatula moving in precise arcs as burgers sizzled and bacon crisped. The heat from the kitchen hit her like a wall, and she wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand before grabbing 2 plates of meatloaf special and heading back out to table 6. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of yellow that made even the healthiest person look slightly ill. Maria delivered the plates with a practiced smile, refilled coffee cups on autopilot, and was clearing table 9 when the bell chimed again. This time, something made her look up. They stood in the doorway like they weren't sure they belonged there, and maybe they weren't sure. The father was tall and thin, his work jacket frayed at the cuffs, and his eyes carried the particular exhaustion that comes from too many disappointments strung together without relief. His wife stood beside him, one hand gripping the shoulder of their daughter, who couldn't have been more than 7 years old, her pink jacket too small and missing a button. The boy, maybe 15 or 16, hung back slightly, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, trying to make himself smaller than he was. Maria watched them scan the crowded diner, saw the way the father's jaw tightened as he counted the empty seats, calculating something in his head. She grabbed 4 menus without being asked, and approached them with the same smile she'd been wearing all night, but this time it felt heavier on her face. The father met her eyes for just a moment before looking away, and in that brief connection, Maria saw something she recognized from her own mirror on the worst days. They followed her to a corner booth, the one near the kitchen, that nobody liked because it was too close to the dishwasher's noise, but tonight it was the only spot available. The vinyl seats squeaked as they slid in, the parents on one side, the kids on the other. Maria placed the menus down and started her usual routine, explaining the specials and pointing out the soup of the day, but her voice trailed off when she noticed none of them were looking at the menus. The mother was studying the laminated pages like they were written in a foreign language, her finger tracing down the prices column. The little girl pressed her face against the window, watching cars pass on Main Street, her stomach making a sound loud enough for Maria to hear. The boy stared at his hands, picking at a callus on his palm, and the father cleared his throat twice before speaking. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much, or maybe like he'd been shouting into the wind all day at a construction site. He asked for water, 4 glasses, and said they needed a minute to decide. Maria nodded and headed to the drink station, but she didn't need to be a detective to understand what was happening. She'd been there herself, 6 months ago, sitting in a different restaurant with their mother, both of them ordering only coffee and pretending they weren't hungry while they made $10 last until Friday. Maria filled 4 glasses with ice water, her hands moving automatically while her mind worked through calculations she knew wouldn't add up to anything good. She could see Mr. Patterson through the kitchen window, his reading glasses perched on his nose, as he reviewed receipts and checked inventory sheets with the intensity of someone who counted every penny because every penny mattered. He'd built this diner from nothing 30 years ago, and he protected it like a parent protects a child. The rules weren't arbitrary cruelty. Maria knew that. They were survival. Every plate of food given away was money that couldn't go toward keeping the lights on or paying the staff. She'd heard him explain it once to a new hire who didn't understand why they couldn't just feed every hungry person who walked through the door. "I'd love to save the world," he'd said, his voice tired, "but I can't save the world and keep this place running. I have to choose." Maria understood that math, respected it even, but understanding something doesn't make it easier when you're standing 10 feet away from a family that's clearly hungry and clearly can't afford to be here. She delivered the water glasses and pulled out her order pad, clicking her pen with her thumb. The mother ordered first, asking for a single order of fries to split between the four of them, and Maria's chest tightened. The father added a cup of coffee, and the way he said it, like he was splurging on something extravagant, made Maria want to scream. The little girl asked if they had crackers, the free kind that come with soup, and her mother shushed her gently but firmly. Maria wrote down the order that wasn't really an order, just a way to occupy a table long enough to rest in the warmth and pretend things were different. She told them she'd be right back and walked toward the kitchen, but halfway there she stopped. Her feet wouldn't move forward. Behind her she could hear the little girl asking her brother if they could come back here for her birthday, and the brother saying maybe, his voice careful and kind, and Maria knew he was lying to protect his sister from a truth she'd learn soon enough anyway. The whole world was full of people lying to protect each other from truths that couldn't be avoided, just postponed. Maria looked at Mr. Patterson again, still absorbed in his paperwork, then looked back at the family in the corner booth, and felt something snap inside her chest like a wire pulled too tight for too long. Maria's pen hovered over the order pad for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Her rent was due in 5 days. Her mother's prescription needed refilling in a week. She had exactly $417 in her checking account, and another $60 in cash tucked inside a coffee can under her bed. Losing this job would mean losing everything she'd been barely holding together with duct tape and determination. But she kept seeing the little girl's face pressed against the window, kept hearing the hollow rumble of a stomach that had been empty too long, and suddenly the rules that had seemed so absolute felt arbitrary and wrong. She tore off the false order she'd written and started again. 2 chicken dinners with mashed potatoes and green beans, 2 cheeseburgers with fries, 4 sodas, dessert special, the apple pie with ice cream that was always popular. She wrote it all down in her careful handwriting, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape before her brain could fully process what she was doing. This wasn't a small infraction. This was $46 worth of food that nobody was going to pay for, and there was no way to hide it. Mr. Patterson checked every receipt against every order at the end of every shift. He'd know immediately. Maria clipped the order to the wheel in the kitchen window and met Danny's eyes. He raised one eyebrow, glancing past her toward the corner booth, then back at her face. He'd been working here long enough to recognize trouble when he saw it being written on an order pad. She shook her head slightly, a gesture that meant don't ask, and he nodded slowly before turning back to his griddle. Danny had 3 kids of his own, and probably understood exactly what she was doing and why. The diner continued its Saturday evening chaos around. Couples celebrated anniversaries in booth 3. A group of teenagers laughed too loudly near the jukebox. An elderly man read the newspaper while his coffee grew cold. Normal life, ordinary moments, the kind of unremarkable contentment that happens when your basic needs are met, and you have the luxury of thinking about anything beyond survival. Maria refilled coffee cups and delivered orders and smiled until her face hurt, all while watching Danny prepare the meal she'd ordered for the family who couldn't afford it. When the plates were ready, she loaded them onto a large tray with the careful balance of someone who'd done this 1,000 times and walked them to the corner booth with her heart in her throat. The father looked up when Maria approached with the loaded tray, and his expression shifted from confusion to alarm in the space of a heartbeat. He started to speak, to correct what was obviously a mistake, but Maria set the plates down quickly, arranging them with practiced efficiency while talking in a voice that was steady despite the trembling in her hands. She told them there'd been a cancellation, Another table had ordered all this, and then had to leave suddenly, and the food was already prepared so it would just go to waste. Otherwise, and Mr. Patterson hated waste. Everyone knew that, so really they'd be doing the diner a favor by eating it. The lie came out smooth and detailed, the kind of lie that people tell when they need to give someone else permission to accept help without feeling like charity. The father wasn't buying it. His eyes narrowed and he started to push back from the table, pride and suspicion mixing into something that looked like anger but was probably just fear of owing something he couldn't repay. His wife touched his arm gently, her fingers wrapping around his wrist, and something passed between them in the silent language that couples develop after years of partnership. The little girl was already reaching for a cheeseburger, her small hands trembling with anticipation and restraint, waiting for permission that seemed to take forever to arrive. The teenage boy sat perfectly still, his eyes moving between the food and his father's face, trained by experience to wait and see which way the wind would blow before committing to anything. Maria stood there with the empty tray tucked under her arm, and for a moment the entire diner seemed to fade away, reduced to just this booth, and these 4 people and these plates of food that represented something larger than dinner. The father's jaw worked, muscles clenching and releasing, and Maria could see him fighting himself, fighting the need and the pride and the shame that comes from needing anything at all. Finally, he nodded once, sharp and quick, and looked away toward the window. Permission granted. The little girl grabbed the cheeseburger with both hands, taking a bite so large her cheeks bulged, and the mother laughed, actually laughed, the sound surprised out of her like it had been trapped for months, waiting for a reason to emerge. The rest of the dinner rush blurred past in a haze of refills and cleared plates, and the constant ballet of restaurant service. Maria moved through her tables with mechanical precision, smiling and chatting and recommending desserts, while part of her brain counted down to the inevitable moment when Mr. Patterson would discover what she'd done. That moment arrived at 9:30, right after the Saturday rush finally eased, and the diner settled into its quieter evening rhythm. Maria was wiping down table 4 when she heard her name called from the kitchen, Miss Patterson's voice cutting through the ambient noise with the particular tone that meant someone was in trouble. She set down her cleaning rag and walked toward the kitchen with her spine straight and her chin up, determined to face whatever was coming with some dignity and tact. Miss Patterson stood by the order window holding the receipt she'd written, his reading glasses perched on his nose, his expression unreadable. Daddy pretended to be very interested in cleaning the griddle, scraping at spots that didn't exist, clearly wanting no part of what was about to happen. Miss Patterson asked Maria to explain the order for table 17, his voice careful and neutral, giving her a chance to offer some explanation that might make sense of the numbers that didn't add up. She could have lied, could have claimed it was a mistake, a wrong ticket, something she'd rung up incorrectly in the chaos of the rush, could have thrown herself on his mercy and begged for another chance, promised it would never happen again, offered to pay for the meals out of her own pocket even though they both knew she couldn't afford it. Instead, she told him the truth, told him about the family in the corner booth, about the little girl who was hungry, about the father who couldn't afford to feed his children and the mother who was trying to make $4 last until something changed. Told him she knew it broke the rules and she knew it meant she'd probably lose her job, but she couldn't watch those kids sit there with empty stomachs while she served dessert to people who didn't need it. Her voice stayed steady through the whole explanation, even as her hands shook, and her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Mr. Patterson stood silent for a long moment after Maria finished talking, his eyes fixed on the receipt in his hands like it contained answers to questions he hadn't known he was asking. The kitchen sounds continued around them, the dishwasher running its cycle, Danny scraping the griddle, the hum of the refrigeration units, all the mechanical heartbeats that kept a restaurant alive. Finally, Mr. Patterson took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture Maria had seen him make 100 times when he was tired or stressed or dealing with something difficult. He asked her if she knew why he had that rule, why it was posted in red letters and underlined twice, and Maria nodded because she did know, because small businesses ran on thin margins and every dollar mattered, and kindness was expensive when you were barely breaking even, because the world was full of hungry people and you couldn't feed them all without destroying yourself in the process. because sometimes the math just didn't work no matter how much you wanted it to. Mr. Patterson nodded slowly, acknowledging that she understood, and then he did something Maria wasn't expecting. He told her about opening this diner 30 years ago with money borrowed from his father-in-law, about working 18-hour days, 7 days a week trying to make it succeed, about the night 15 years ago when his own children went to bed hungry because he'd put every cent into keeping the business afloat during a slow winter. He told her about the rules he'd made back then, rules designed to protect him from his own generous impulses, rules that kept the diner running when compassion alone would have bankrupted him. And then he told her about the night last month when his daughter called from 3 states away, crying because she couldn't afford groceries and was too proud to ask for help, and how he'd failed to notice she was struggling until it was almost too late. His voice cracked slightly on that last part, a hairline fracture in his usually steady demeanor. He folded the receipt carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, then looked at Maria with eyes that suddenly seemed very old and very tired. He told her she still had her job, but if she ever broke the rules again she'd better have a good reason, and helping people who genuinely needed it counted as a good reason in his book. Maria arrived for her Sunday morning shift expecting the worst despite Mr. Patterson's words the night before. Sometimes people said things in the heat of a moment that they reconsidered in the cold light of morning, when the emotions faded and the practical realities reasserted themselves. She'd barely slept, her mind running through scenarios of job hunting and resume writing, and how to explain to her mother why they might need to move somewhere cheaper. The diner was quiet when she pushed through the front door, only a handful of early risers occupying the booths, nursing coffee and reading newspapers in the gentle morning light that was so different from the harsh fluorescence of evening shifts. Mr. Patterson was behind the counter, something he rarely did anymore, having mostly transitioned to the office work and leaving the front of house to his staff. He poured 2 cups of coffee without asking and gestured for Maria to sit on one of the stools, an invitation that felt strange after 3 years of only interacting across the professional divide of employer and employee. He slid 1 cup across to her and wrapped his hands around the other, steam rising between them like morning mist. He told her the family had come back morning early, right when the diner opened at 6. The father had asked to speak with the owner, and Mr. Patterson had come out expecting trouble or complaints or any of the 1,000 problems that restaurant owners deal with daily. Instead, the man had handed him $60 in small bills and coins, money that had clearly been scraped together from every possible source, probably more than they could afford, and asked that it go to Maria as a tip and a thank you for her kindness. He'd said they'd never forget what she did, that his daughter talked about it all through the evening and into the morning, that sometimes one act of human decency could restore your faith that the world wasn't entirely cold and indifferent. Patterson pushed the money across the counter to Maria, all $60 in a small stack of bills and scattered coins, and told her he'd been thinking about the rules a lot lately, about when they served their purpose and when they just served themselves. He said he was adding a new policy, a discretionary fund for situations like last night, times when feeding someone mattered more than following protocol. It wouldn't be unlimited and it wouldn't be advertised, but it would exist for those moments when the math of compassion needed to outweigh the math of profit. Maria wrapped her hands around the coffee cup and felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for longer than just last night, maybe for years, maybe since her mother got sick and the world became a series of calculations about what they could and couldn't afford. The morning sun streamed through the diner windows, turning everything golden and warm, and for the first time in months Maria felt like maybe there was enough money and enough time and enough kindness to go around after all.